I have a question that I think, I think as fans, most of us, or all of us, hopefully realize that there have to be changes between the books and the TV show, and that, they're going to be kind of different animals or almost parallel but different stories. And one thing that has come up quite a bit in discussions I've had with fans is that the House of the Undying in the season finale, there was not as much there as obviously as in the books. And I guess from my two cents is that to put everything in would have probably blown the budget. But there seems to be a choice that the creators or that Dan and David have made, that it's more about an examination of power and being powerful and powerless and how you shift between those worlds, and there's less of the kind of mythology over thousands of years. Is that something that you think is an appropriate choice for the show to make? Were you ever upset about the House of the Undying stuff?
Well, this is just sort of a general question, a specific question there. I mean, a lot of the material in the House of the Undying in the books is in the nature of prophecy, and also some glimpses into the past. And I can do that in the books because I know, roughly when and where it's going to be paid off. You'd really have to talk to David and Dan and get a precise explanation of why they made the choices they made in that particular scene. But I think some of it maybe they were a little leery of the prophecy because we don't know how many seasons we're going to have or how many hours we're going to have each season, and would some of these plot threads later on have to be eliminated? And if so, it would sort of be stupid to have a whole prophecy of something that never pays off down the road because we have to cut that thread or cut that character or something for budgetary reasons. They have been not doing a lot with the prehistory, the flashbacks, the stuff that occurred 16 years ago, 20 years ago, 300 years ago. I mean, there's some references to it, but not a lot. And sooner or later, they are going to have to deal with, I think, Rhaegar and Lyanna and what happened between them, and the Battle of the Trident, and all of these things, and the Mad King. I know for the first season they did shoot some flashback scenes with the Mad King, but they were never included in the final take. So I don't know. It's an interesting question to see how they're going to handle that, because certainly in the books, the past, the present, and the future, all reflect upon each other and are included part of it. I mean, this also gets into the larger issue of exposition, and I know that you critics have coined this sexposition term, which has become widely adopted and part of the discussion of the show. But if you even pushing aside the sex part of sexposition as to a separate issue, which we can discuss at some point if we wish, and just looking at the exposition part, there's a tremendous amount of exposition in the books. Exposition is easy to do in a novel. I can just have my character think about, we're passing the castle. This castle has been here for 400 years. It was originally, the Mad Lord Bertram lived there, and he ate all of his children. And it looks ominous even now. But of course, when you're filming, you have to put that in the mouth of someone. You have to have them writing past, and someone actually has to say that, unless you're going to do a voiceover and all that. So either you lose the exposition, or you have a lot of people kind of giving historical lectures along the way, or talking about the deep, dark secrets of their own personal youth. And this is the challenge. As a novelist, I have many tools of narrative, and exposition is one of them. Exposition through internal monologue, exposition simply through expository prose. I mean, a paragraph in a book, a paragraph of expository prose is nothing. You read it and it's over, and then you're right on to the action. You hardly notice the speed bump in the road. But in a TV show, it's a big thing where suddenly somebody starts talking about history for a minute on screen. A minute on screen is a lot more than a minute's worth of reading material in a novel.
I want to jump in here and say, very briefly, one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here is when I was a kid in 1980, I was reading all this science fiction, walking into walls, and then I grew up and put it aside and did more serious things. And which seemed like a good idea at the time. And then last year, yes, I'm late to it. I picked up a Game of Thrones, and the next thing I know, I'm walking into walls again for the first time in 30 years because I can't take my nose out of the book. And I'm curious as to how you did this to me. Because I'm like, how did he do this? I thought I was above and beyond this, and I'm not, obviously.
It was sheer brilliance.
And I have some questions about the book and about the books and your skills, and I want to see if I can get some tips from you in case I ever want to write a historically great fantasy series. First, about that. Why didn't you start a Game of Thrones with the Baratheon Rebellion? Because you know everything about it. Why do you start 16 years after its events?
I didn't know everything about it, actually. I sort of found out about it as the characters did as I went on. So there's a lot of the process of discovery. In some ways, I think, particularly in the early books, but the process is still ongoing. I'm writing forwards and backwards at the same time. I'm revealing what's happening in the present of the book, and through devices like internal monologue and exposition and so forth, I'm also revealing what happened 16 years ago. And the process of the revelation of what happened during Robert's Rebellion is particularly interesting, I think made more interesting because I'm revealing it through a series of point of view characters who have a different recollection of it. The equivalent in real life terms is sitting down and discussing the Vietnam period with all things. I have a very strong memories of the Vietnam War from someone who was a clean for Gene McCarthy kind of guy, demonstrating here at Northwestern and let us get out of Vietnam. Very different perspective on the war than somebody like Joe Haldeman who went to Vietnam and got his ass shot off, or various other people and or some conservative who was all for the war and all that. I mean, we all have these events took place, but what actually took place, we're reflecting into the past, and I find that very interesting. Which is another difference, of course, between television and books. As a prose writer, I have the structure of a viewpoint character, but the camera is an objective viewpoint. When we present a flashback, we're saying this is exactly how it happened. We can't necessarily, unless we do a full-on Rashomon kind of thing, where we present several versions of the same scene. The whole idea of subjectivity and different people remembering events in different ways and having different interpretations of things that happen is very difficult to do in television.
Just to follow on from what Peter was asking about, I think one of the things you do so well by having that tight focus on each person is explore, I just want to kind of get back to the idea of power that I was talking about earlier, that I think one of the things that's so involving about the stories is that the people who start out with power might be quite limited in some ways and can lose power, and that ups the stakes. And the people who are allegedly powerless with the right kind of cunning and guile and smarts and, even heart, they can find ways out of, situations that seem hopeless. Was that sort of an idea that was in the back of your mind when you set out to start to do this, to sort of examine those ideas about power and hierarchy and how those things aren't as fixed as people might think that they are?
Yeah, definitely. The whole subject of power is fascinating to me. Both in a historical context and in a real context. I mean, how does power work? What's it based on? Varys's riddle, which I was very glad that they included, I think is one of the most important parts of the book, where he asks Tyrion, who has the real power in that situation, where the rich man and the priest and the king are each telling the sellsword to kill the other people. It's actually the sellsword who has the power, in a sense. He's the one who has the sword in his hand. He has the power of life and death over the other three. But he is going to obey one of the other three because of some illusion of power. And yet these are, I mean, when I see that scene played out in my mind's eye, these are like three old fat guys. And, the sellsword, none of them can actually do anything themselves to the sellsword. And yet they command him somehow because they can summon other sellswords. Well, why do those other sellswords obey? I mean, this whole notion of what power is our societies are built on this structure of sand. All societies, and you see that periodically with the falls of great empires and nations. What the Soviet Union, it looked solid and eternal, this gigantic police state, and one day it just blew away. It was, we're not going to follow those guys anymore. Let's get rid of them, and we'll bring in some new guys. And suddenly the Soviet Union was gone overnight. Why does that happen? I was reading a book. A couple months ago, a popular history of Jerusalem, a fascinating book by Montefiore, I believe it was. Whole history of Jerusalem from, biblical prehistory and the Maccabees and the Jewish state and all that, right to modern day Jerusalem. And fascinating history. I mean, Jerusalem has been through so many different things: the Crusaders and the Turks and the Arabs and the Jewish empires early on, the Romans. Everybody's had Jerusalem at some point, and then usually they've murdered a lot of other people here. But I was reading about this one particular crazy sultan or caliph or something during the Islamic thing who was clearly nuts. At one point he decided his doctors were trying to kill him, so he had all of his doctors killed. Okay. Medical reform in its most primitive area. But then he decided that the women of the women of the court were conspiring against him. But he liked women because they had like babies and other uses sexually and stuff like that. So he didn't want to have them all killed. So he commanded his guard to cut off the hands of all of the women in the court. Not only like his own wives and concubines, but evidently their wives and concubines as well. And they did it. Now, what the hell is going on there? Why doesn't like the captain of the guard say to the sergeant, this guy is fucking nuts. We have swords. He's this poncy little guy going around here. Why don't we kill him instead of cutting off our wives' hands? I don't know. Where does the power come from? But it's a fascinating issue to explore. And, huge drama comes out of that. And, don't be surprised if sometime in Ice and Fire I have some crazy king cut off the hands of a whole bunch of people.
Well, I think I anticipate that.
You can't make up this stuff, by the way. I mean, that's where, you read enough history and boy, it's all just there, The people who accused my books or the TV show of being, exceptionally bloody have obviously never read about the real Middle Ages or the history of Jerusalem or some of the things that actually happened in real life. I mean, this is like Disneyland in Western compared to some of the things that really happened.
I think that's the first comparison of Disneyland to Westeros I've ever heard.
Theme park people.
I don't want to ride those rides.
They end badly.